And before
Thank
you
you.
start, so Fadi's involved in the World Cup in Qatar, in case you didn't know. And I have a present for you as well.
Ah, already. Wait until you hear.
I thought it would only be fair if I get a shirt that you get one too.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
So you can wear this at the World Cup.
Thank you.
We all know who's going to win the World Cup, right? Who's going to win it? Yes. Watch out what
Thank
an
you.
Englishman says. And I'll just open it for you.
Oh, great. Yeah.
He also has number 10, obviously.
Oh,
there
wow.
we go.
Thank you. Thank you. That's when we say Haidu lives forever.
There we go. You know it. You know it. It's on the back right up here. Okay, over to you now. Everyone enjoy the last keynote speech. Round of applause again for
Thank you.
Dr. Fadi Makki.
Thank you very much.
I'll take my clothes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Or should I say, Dobar dan, split it. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. I call myself an accidental behavioral economist because I stumbled upon the field some 10 years ago. And since then, I see everything through a behavioral lens. And I'm passionate about behavioral science, and I make it my passion and my mission in life to talk about the power of behavioral science to solve societal problems and public policy challenges. So over the coming 20 minutes or so, I shall share my insights on how we've been applying behavioral science in public policy and environmental policy in particular. Over the last decade or so, there has been a growing and systematic use of behavioral economics tools and methods by governments and organizations, partly to make their work more evidence-based, but also partly to make it more human-centric and make it more in touch with reality. So the works of people like Herbert Simon or Danny Kahneman or Richard Thaler have had an immense impact on public policy and on making economics more in touch with reality by integrating in it what we call insights from behavioral science fields such as psychology, sociology, anthropology, neuroscience, to better explain why people act the way they do. But before that, and until very recently, much of public policy has been still correlated with rationality assumptions about human beings, namely that people respond to classical policy levers. So if your government or an organization want to change people's behavior, what you do is use first command and control. If you don't do this, you'll be punished. Or you vary the financial incentive, or simply give information. And we've been assuming that people, when making decisions, are having infinite willpower, processing capabilities to weigh cost and benefits, take the correct decisions, and always act on them. However, we are human beings, and therefore we're not as rational as we like to think we are. We have cognitive limitations. We use what we call mental shortcuts or heuristics to kind of make decisions that often lead us to what we call systematic errors in judgment or biases. And this is why nudges, which are anchored in behavioral economics, have been so appealing in behavioral change. According to nudge theory, which was put forward by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler in their bestseller book, Nudge, there are tools that maintain freedom of choice, and therefore they are libertarian, but at the same time, they somewhat steer us in the right direction, in directions that designers think are in our best interest. And therefore, they are paternalistic in that sense. So these libertarian paternalistic tools that nudge us in the right direction are driven by a solid understanding of many of the cognitive limitations that stand in the way of acting in our best interest and following through on our intentions. Cognitive limitations such as our preference for the status quo and our tendency to procrastinate, our bias for the present and our preference for immediate rewards, even if waiting a bit could be more lucrative. Our tendency to be unrealistically optimistic or to be overly confident about our capabilities. For example, take people who text and drive. They are aware of the risks, but somehow think these will materialize for others, not for themselves. So inspired by findings of behavioral science in different policy areas, nudge units, or what we call behavioral science teams, have been spreading around the world. Probably you've heard about the Prime Minister of the UK setting up his nudge unit in 2010, and President Obama setting up his own behavioral science team at the White House. We now have hundreds of behavioral science teams and nudge units around the world, in government, central, municipal, academia, NGOs, and now more and more private sector. Even in countries that don't have yet nudge units, we've seen behavioral science experiments happening. Companies are moving into that direction and are either creating kind of behavioral science unit or special position called behavioral scientists or chief experimentation officers and so on. And these units and teams essentially do three things. The first thing they do, they dissect the challenge from a behavioral lens to better understand why we do the things that we do. So we dig into the biases. The second thing that we do is we design nudges and other behavioral intervention that are based on that superior understanding of the context, which basically increases the chance of those policies that we're putting are becoming implementable. Third, and that's the most important thing, we test and test and test to test what works from what does not work, ideally using the golden standard of randomized controlled trials, which we borrow from medical and clinical fields. Because, and this is a big motto of ours, what works is not what we think works, but what is tested to work. Sounds very simple, but very powerful. These insights from behavioral science have been used to tackle a variety of public policy challenges. So we've used it for public finance. We've used it in education, in food waste. And basically, we've used it at 3 stages of the behavioral change pathway for non-communicable diseases, which are responsible for 2/3 of death worldwide. And as we know, one of the risk factors for NCDs is unhealthy lifestyle, including unhealthy environment. So we've also used it for communicable diseases such as COVID-19. Did it occur to you that in the early days of the pandemic, behavioral tools were by and large one of the few tools available to combat the spread of the pandemic and get people to comply with social distancing and preventative measures? Even when the vaccine was made available, behavioral science was still called upon to help in overcoming many of the drivers of hesitancy, such as low level of trust, fear of side effect, and the attitude of, don't worry, I'm careful, I won't be affected. But perhaps one of the policy areas that where behavioral science received some of its most acclaimed success is environmental policies and climate change. Now, so far, environmental nudges have been focused mainly on targeting individuals and countering biases, many of the biases at stake. Biases such as present bias, whereby we focus on today, maybe tomorrow, but not so much the distant future, which Cass Sunstein calls later land, which we never see ourselves visiting. And basically, that leads us to avoiding many of the long-term benefits and focusing on the short-term ones. Why is this risky and myopic in environmental context? Because we're urged to act sustainably now, but told that there are future benefits that are not always very tangible to us. Add to this that if others see that we're free-riding and basically our commitment is reduced, we might probably not kind of act on our behavior in a positive way because we think it wouldn't matter. Now, in response to many of these challenges that we're facing, and which are essentially behavioral, there are many interventions informed by behavioral science that tackle people's cognitive biases and bottlenecks. For instance, to get people to commit to sustainable behaviors through pledges, or to seek to reduce the hassle factor and simplifying the steps and making it easy for them, or making salient the future costs, or using social norms to update the incorrect perceptions. And there are many tools that have been used, some of which we bring from our famous mnemonic we call shape difference. For now, what I will do is share some of the insights from interventions that were proven effective, some of which from experiments that we've done in B4Development, which is the behavioral science entity of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, which is in charge of organizing the FIFA Qatar World Cup in 2022. So for now, I will focus on 3 such tools, and I'll give details of experiments. The first of these tools is what we call the default rule. We know that we tend to stick to the status quo, either because our cognitive bandwidth is already too burdened to be making choices, or because of the hassle associated with making that extra decision. I would like you for a moment to speculate about the percentage of people who, when ordering food on a delivery app, would opt out of plastic cutlery if the default was to give it, versus the percentage of people who would opt into plastic cutlery if the default is not to give it. Take a moment. So basically, what we found is, if the default is to give plastic cutlery, only around 10% would actively opt out. The rest, 90%, will go with the default. Now, if we switch the default to no plastic cutlery, only 10% would opt into plastic cutlery. The rest would also go with the default. Now, percentage might vary from one country to another, but this is the direction. So the majority would go with the default. What does that mean? It means that a simple shift in the default rule from opt-out to opt-in could lead to 9 times more environmentally friendly results. These findings have led to many of the large delivery apps that you know, Uber Eats, Zomato, Talabat, switch to default customers into the most sustainable option. This is what we call the power of the default nudge. People sticking to status quo even if it's better to switch to change to another option. We often find default nudges combined with what we call active choice, whereby typically we cannot proceed further without making a decision one way or another. I'll mention another tool, and that's my favorite. It's called social norms. So we're prone to adjust our beliefs and behavior to belong to a social group. While these norms are very powerful in dictating our behaviors and practices, we may sometimes have flawed ideas about what other thinks or do. And once the information, however, is updated, we would be likely to change our behavior accordingly. So knowing the correct trend or actual norms is a very powerful nudge to get us to adjust. And we've seen it probably in many cases, some of the classics of behavioral science in public finance management, to get people to pay on time by telling them, neighbors have already done that. 9 out of 10 of neighbors have already done that, right? A famous example in the environment field is used as a classic by O-Power, which is a software company in the US, which sent out energy consumption reports to households, comparing their consumption records to those of their neighbors and the neighbors with the most efficient consumption habits, which resulted in a reduction in energy consumption for those and new sustainable habits over the long run. So we've been experimenting firsthand with social norms, witnessing the power of updating people's perception of others' behavior on their own, particularly in the context of large sports events. Fans may think that sustainable behaviors are not a priority for those around them, or think no one is engaging in environmental behavior as part of the match experience. So when we rectify that misconception and communicate the correct trend, we start seeing change. In an experiment we did at B4Development, we updated fans' perception of the norm in relation to the rise in public transport and ridership, which led to more than 5% increase in the fan willingness to take the public transport. And the highest impact was for those with the high expectations of others' use of public transport, making them 24% more likely to use public transport. Another powerful tool that we've been seeing work very powerfully is what we call reminders with salience at the right time. So despite the fact that fans do acknowledge the importance of environmental sustainability, they have kind of an intention-action gap, probably due to inconvenience, forgetfulness, and so on, which is expected somehow from fans who are invested in a football game, not so much in the kind of environmental repercussions. In one experiment we did, a call for action reminder led to about 13% increase in the accuracy with which fans disposed of their trash, throwing recyclables in the recyclable bins and the non-recyclable in the general waste. We also used reminder in another set of tournaments, which was very effective in decreasing the amount of waste left behind in spectator seats. Actually, fans in sections where we used those reminders were littering 18% less than the control group where we didn't place those reminders. Now, the pilot sustainability interventions that we did last year, building up to the World Cup, are very important for several reasons. First, major sports events are a great opportunity to conduct experiments on fans from diverse backgrounds. And second, basically, there is room for scaling up what we pilot in future events. Not only if they're successful, but even if they fail, because you learn just as much from failures. We call it celebrate failures, as long as you know what went wrong. More importantly, this World Cup is going to be the first time ever behavioral science is being used in a systematic way in a tournament of this sort. So working on the entire journey from the moment they arrive at the airport all the way to the engagement in stadiums, using behavioral science insights to gently nudge them in a more sustainable and healthy behavior. Now, an event of this sort supports the following reflection. Influencing behavior of individuals is going to be always very important. And so far, our work have largely concentrated on going what we call upward the left quadrant, where we have been mainly using behavioral science to nudge individuals through pilot experiments, randomized trials of a small and medium size. And there's been an explosion of sustainability nudges in this regard, in restaurants, cafeterias, stadiums, streets, and many very innovative and being replicated in many countries. But what is missing is scale. Scales that takes the intervention to what we call population level, right word, and create massive change in government and organization behavior, which lead us to the global impact that we wish to see. And for this paradigm to shift, to happen, I'll mention 4 things in particular. The first thing that we need to do is scale up the use of behavioral science through massive capacity building across the entire value chain, from environmental policy development all the way to implementation and evaluation, by all stakeholders, legislators, regulators, technical agencies, NGOs, and private sector. The idea being that nudge units and behavioral science teams have been piloting and can pilot, and we've been called upon to conduct experiments, but there's only so much we can do. Bandwidth is indeed limited. What we need to do instead is make use of behavioral science tools in a more streamlined way by these stakeholders, getting them to the level of being able themselves to identify opportunities for bringing those insights to bear in their work. And even at some stage, conducting their own experiments and setting up their own nudge units. Imagine a city of Split having its own nudge unit at the municipal level to deal with sustainability issues. That would be amazing. As I said, we're beyond proof of concept on the importance of using behavioral science in environmental policy. So the mindset is there. But such mindset requires skill set in behavioral science. This is what we're trying to do through getting more environmentalists to undergo training in behavioral science through capacity building workshops and courses. This is what we're trying to get universities to do through integrating behavioral science course into their offerings in a systematic way, so that graduates, many of whom will be the environmental leaders of tomorrow, would have a strong foundation in behavioral science so that they can apply it themselves. And we've been doing it at university, and one thing we've been doing also, if done a very pioneering thing at schools. So we taught over a semester students grade 9 and 10, a notch course, and this is the results. They helped design intervention to get people to use the stairs, not the escalators, install the people counter, and do the basic analysis with our support. Fascinating. This is one of the pioneering courses that we've done. This is what we're trying to do now, getting more of this happening. Now, the second thing that we need to do to scale up the use of behavioral science is to embed more smart technologies in a more systematic way into behavioral intervention, because that will take it to new heights altogether. With the aid of technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, our ability will improve in terms of predicting how a person will respond to a persuasive technique, through which channel and at what time. For example, and we've been doing this in so many experiments, young men are typically less likely to conform. So social norms might not work so much in their case. Even the same persons behave very differently as football fans in stadium, as university students on campus, as tourists in a foreign country, or as family members in a reunion. So capturing as much unique data in an easy and quick way is key to designing the right intervention and targeting those in a fashionable way. So nudging people to take a short survey in stadium using QR codes allowed us to understand basic environmental knowledge, attitude, and practices of these fans in terms of recycling and littering, and helped us better target certain interventions to them and improve their willingness to act environmentally friendly, and actually their behavior on trash and sustainability through small primings in the surveys. I should add that there are many innovative environmental solutions using a combination of technology and some element of behavioral science, but having this arsenal of great technology solutions we've been hearing about today for climate change is one thing, but getting people to actually use that technology is quite another. So some thinking needs to go more by these conferences and other people as well into improving the uptake of this technology. We use a framework called Mobilize, Engage, Follow Through, which helps us dissect the challenge at every stage and kind of get into the journey, the biases, and so on. The third thing that I would like to mention as important for the paradigm shift is really a concept that I borrow from the food and beverage industry, namely what we call voluntary reformulation. And there's been a lot of success creating healthier impact on consumers in terms of reduced sugar and salt consumption because of change at the source by the industry. We've seen many successes. The recent UK government's initiative to get food manufacturers to voluntarily reformulate products with high levels of salt was much more effective than kind of communication campaigns to tell people about the risks of salt. And you can start seeing the parallel of where I'm heading. I believe the equivalent can happen in the environmental discourse. Some companies have started doing that, okay? Many supermarkets chains operating in countries where we still don't have a ban on single plastic use have been voluntarily kind of reducing use of plastic, for instance, by not offering customers plastic bags if they purchase only one item, or shifting to paper altogether. Another example is that of transport company services who voluntarily decided to only offer electric cars of various brands. So giving people information about how beneficial it would be for them to request eco-friendly vehicle or to take their own plastic bags or reusable bags might not be as effective as industries reformulating their products themselves. So we need to target more that. But there are times when nudging industry and voluntary formulation might not be enough. So some element of what we call command and control is still needed, while at the same time behaviorally informing it. Remember how we started initially nudging people to get vaccinated by using various techniques. effective messenger, emotional appeal to protect loved ones. But at some stage, there was a move to kind of make the lives of those unwilling to vaccinate even more difficult, and sometimes mandating vaccine altogether. Environmental policy may need to go into that direction. The example of closing the grip are common in some of the cities like Paris, Bilbao, Glasgow, which are essentially reducing speed limit at typically high traffic areas. These cities are making an effort to apply what we call the concept of sludge, or the extra friction that prevent us from doing something, which Cass Sunstein beautifully explained in his book on the matter. These hassles are not banning cars, but making it more difficult to drive one in specific places. This is leading not only to reduction in accidents, but leading to change in switch into other environmentally sustainable modes of transportation, and leading ultimately to a reduction on the pollution level. There are many examples of behaviorally informing regulation in the area of tax. Ladies and gentlemen, to protect the environment, none of the conventional tools of policy will work on their own. Not information-based, not command and control, not financial incentives driven. We need a holistic approach that complements conventional weapons with behavioral science, an approach that targets not only individuals, but also the industry and policymakers. More importantly, we need an approach that uses experimental methods to leverage behavioral data, but ethically, to test what works from what doesn't. And there are infinite opportunities around us to integrate nudges in our daily life. Switching a default here, a lost framing there, an update of people's perception on the correct trends, a use of emotion, timely reminders, feedback, making it easy to uptake a technology that is green. And we should learn how to do that, each in their own area, and try to make the world more environmentally friendly, one nudge at a time. Thank you.